Up next in the broadcast, in the United States, Republicans capture the Senate in the midterm elections and maintain their majority in the House of Representatives, leaving the U.S. Congress in the hands of the Conservative Party. Japan's acceleration of its monetary stimulus program begins to have a real effect on Korea's stock market, with shares of major exporters competing with Japan taking big hits. And U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry warns North Korea that its path bearing nuclear weapons will lead to a dead end, and expresses hope that U.S. cooperation with China will lead to a safer Korean peninsula. Primetime News begins now. Welcome to the program. You're watching Primetime News live from Seoul. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Chery. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We begin in the U.S., where a political shift in power is taking place. Republicans have won control over the Senate after winning some key states in the midterm elections. Results came in widely as expected, and a Republican-controlled House and Senate can present some hardships for the rest of President Obama's term in office. Our Connie Lee has more on the implications of their huge win.
It's a big win for Republicans. They now have full control of the U.S. Congress.
And I just want to tell you right now that with your help and God's will, we will change the direction of our country.
Seen as a referendum on President Barack Obama, Tuesday's midterm elections brought out the voters who are unhappy about the current administration and the political gridlock in Washington. Republicans maintained their majority in the House and gained control of the Senate by picking up at least 6 seats in tight races all across America. The GOP sweep first started with Shelley Moore Capito, who won in West Virginia.
We were one of the first states to send a message to President Obama tonight that this president's agenda just isn't working for West Virginia.
Another winner was Republican leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, who was re-elected. Seen here casting his vote earlier in the day, McConnell is now set to become the Senate's majority leader. Analysts had been predicting a Republican victory as President Obama's approval ratings have hit their lowest levels since his inauguration. According to the latest Gallup poll, Obama's approval rating stands at just 42%, with 53% disapproving of his job as president. When the Republicans officially take over the Senate in January, it will be a tough final 2 years for the Obama administration. As of now, it's silence from the White House. But President Obama is set to make a public statement on Wednesday. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Japan's central bank shocked markets worldwide last week by announcing a fresh set of stimulus measures, saying it would increase purchases of longer-term debt to boost the Japanese economy.
Korea's benchmark index has certainly felt the effects, as have Korean exporters who are seeking ways to keep up with their Japanese counterparts. Our Shin Se-min explains.
Korea's benchmark Kospi index closed down on all 3 days of this week. The Korean won also fell to a new 9-month low, a 1,083.61 against a greenback. This is a reaction to Bank of Japan's new stimulus program worth of trillions of yen announced last Friday and the following weakening in the Japanese yen. Investors are not liking Korean shares on concerns that the weak yen trend might erode profitability of Korean exporters. The auto sector is the hardest hit. On the first day to react to the BOJ stimulus announcement on Monday, shares of both Hyundai and Kia Motors dropped by more than 5.5%. And analysts blame the fall of exporters to the similarities that the two countries share.
Both Korea and Japan overlap in many ways, starting with its industrial structure. In the past, Korea mimicked Japan's high economic growth strategy, and in terms of export product lines like automobiles, semiconductors, and steel, they overlap. So it makes perfect sense that the Korean economy is being influenced by the course of the Japanese yen.
And Bank of Japan's Governor Haruhiko Kuroda said Wednesday that the central bank will do whatever it takes to throw out deflation, bringing down the yen to its lowest in nearly 7 years against a greenback. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And let's go in depth on this topic tonight. Joining us for this conversation is Professor Shin Se-don from Sungmyung Women's University. Thanks so much for coming in today.
Pleasure.
So investors seem to be punishing Korea's markets these days since the announcement of the stimulus. Should South Korea worry?
Of course, the hardest hit area is exchange rate because yen used to be 1,400 won per 100 yen. But now it dropped below 950 for almost first time in almost 3 years. So the yen becomes so weak against the dollar as well as so weak against the Korean currency that makes Japanese exporters become very competitive against Korean exporters, not just in the global market, but in the domestic market. So the Korean manufacturers have to face severe challenge from Japanese, producers such as beer or tires. So it's not just Toyota versus Hyundai Motor Corporations. Broad spectrum of commodities. I think Korean manufacturers will lose competitiveness against Japanese counterparts.
So the first group that usually raises their hands when there's some sort of exchange rate policy shift in such a dramatic fashion are exporters. And Korean automobile makers, as you just mentioned, seem to be taking a hit. Toyota, on the other hand, raised its profit forecast because of this exchange rate shift. How long do you think this effect will last on Korean manufacturers and exporters?
Well, the yen, the weaker yen started about 2 years ago when the Prime Minister Abe took office end of 2012. Usually, according to my research, usually it's going to take about 2 years for the full effect on Korean exports will emerge. So it's going to be about 2 years after the Abe took office, and now is the time that the effect will begin to materialize. So we haven't seen actually in the global market the effect of the weakest yen. Now
of the first round.
Yeah. So
now we're seeing the first round effects, and then 2 years later we'll see the second round effects.
Right. So far, if you look at the trade volume, or especially the trade volumes in the automobile industry, we don't see a tangible, reduction in the automobile exports. So now I think the real effect will begin to materialize in the automobile industry and the ICT industries, and also a lot of parts and material industries. So for the last 20 years, Korean manufacturers try to substitute Japanese imports, but the 20 years of gaining in competitiveness in those areas, we are beginning to lose, and the actual data will begin to show up down the road, from the end of this year, and especially early next year, we're going to see a dramatic fall in the export volumes.
Do you think the Chekyung-hwanomics was not enough, or do you think we need more of it?
Well, to me, the main effect of Japanese policy is not the size of the quantitative easing. Real effect is the yen, and the yen broke 110 level, and I'm afraid that the level will, the yen rate will reach over 120 or maybe 130, in which case, it's going to be a very devastating effect on Korean exports in all spectrum of exports, not just to the automobile industry. We're going to have parts, raw materials, chemical, even the shipbuilding or steel and steel products industry. I think we're going to have a tremendous challenge from Japanese counterparts.
So does the Korean government fight this with, reforming its entire economy, as has been said, with a lot of the economic reform measures, or can there actually be a monetary policy that can be applied on our side? Will this, recent stimulus surprise affect the Bank of Korea's
First,
meeting?
if you compare the size of stimulus package between Korea and Japan, you can't compare that because Japan's 100 trillion yen which is about 1,000 trillion won versus 40 trillion. So it's about less than 30%, 40% again. So the size of stimulus package we can compare. And about the transforming the industry, it's going to take a long time. After all industry have lost their competitiveness, right? So we need to do something dramatic to at least survive this kind of challenge. And in that respect, I think Choinomics so far has done very little.
All right. So, well, there's a lot of work ahead for us to do. That sounds quite challenging. Thanks so much for joining us and sharing your expertise.
Pleasure. My pleasure.
Top U.S. diplomat John Kerry has once again asked for China's help in getting North Korea to give up its nuclear program, saying support is not only wanted but necessary. And as our Kim Hyun-bin reports, Kerry believes the key is getting North Korea to realize its nuclear program will only lead to a dead end.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says he hopes to work closely with China to make North Korea realize that its current path only leads to a dead end. In a speech at Johns Hopkins University on Tuesday, Kerry said North Korea will only realize security and prosperity when it gives up its nuclear program. The U.S. diplomat also stressed the importance of cooperation with China on non-proliferation. Last week, Kerry praised Beijing for putting pressure on the North by putting limitations on trade going into the country. China is North Korea's last remaining major ally and a key provider of food and fuel supplies. Kerry is scheduled to visit China this week for a range of multi- and bilateral meetings, a week ahead of President Barack Obama's visit to Beijing for the APEC Leaders Summit. Kerry's comments come as North Korea ruled out holding talks with the United States regarding either its human rights or nuclear issues. A spokesperson from the North's Foreign Ministry said Tuesday Pyongyang would not discuss such topics with enemies that aim to topple the regime, adding it's only willing to speak with countries that respect its sovereign rights. Watchers say the official statement linking human rights and nuclear issues could be an attempt to influence Washington ahead of a possible UN General Assembly vote on a resolution against North Korea's human rights abuses. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
And the White House says President Barack Obama will meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping when he visits Beijing next week for the APEC summit. At the center of the discussion set for next Wednesday will be how to shape the new model of relations between the two superpowers and how to deal with North Korea's nuclear threat. The Ebola outbreak, pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, and China's territorial dispute with Japan in the South China Sea are also expected to be discussed. President Obama's 6-day, 3-nation trip also takes him to Burma and Australia as well.
Over on Korea's political front, pension reform was the hot topic on the last day of a legislative questioning session at the National Assembly today. But if the opposition party is going to go along with the ruling party's plan to overhaul the current system, it wants something in return. Kim Myung-gil has more.
The pension reform plan for civil servants was the session's most debated issue, with the ruling Henry Party and the government pushing to pass the bill by year end.
If we don't reform the pension program, the government will record a pension deficit of some $9.2 billion each year, which will be a disaster for our future generations and create a national burden. We ask for the cooperation of civil servants.
However, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy is backing away from the proposed plan, saying social consensus must be reached at a national level. Political analysts say the two parties may be gearing up for under-the-table deals, as the opposition side is demanding a parliamentary probe into the Four Major Rivers project. The controversial $20 billion project launched under the previous Lee Myung-bak administration has been a focus of concern for the opposition party, as well as environmental activists who believe it has harmed the river's ecosystem.
3 out of 4 people are calling for a parliamentary probe into the Four Major Rivers project. The probe is aimed at digging up how taxpayer money was used. There is no reason for the rival parties to quarrel over the issue.
Last month, the two parties reached a last-minute deal on the contentious Seoul ferry bill, breaking months of political deadlock which logjammed key bills in parliament. As the governing Saenuri party is eager to keep the legislative momentum going, pundits say it is likely that they will seek negotiations with the opposition and make concessions in order to quickly pass the pension bill. 지명길, Arirang News.
Korea is known for its chaebol, or conglomerates, that dominate the domestic economy, but that leaves a little room for new startups to flourish. And that's shown in a new report that says more than half of newly established companies here in Korea were new affiliates of chaebols. Connie Kim reports.
The playing field for Korean businesses has gotten steeper over the past decade, with the big getting bigger and fewer firms finding their footing. Among Korea's largest 500 companies, management evaluation firm CEO Score says the number of companies who have been in operation for less than 20 years has dropped over the past 10 years from nearly 200 in 2004 to 164 as of last month. Look a little closer and the problem becomes even more apparent, as 63% of the newly established companies were spearheaded by conglomerates.
Over the past decade, more conglomerate affiliates have been created compared to startups, and the environment that nurtures new businesses so they can start from scratch has deteriorated.
While conglomerates were branching out with their affiliates, only 19 of the 500 largest companies in Korea began as startups. The IT sector made up a large portion of that figure, topped by the internet portal site Naver and gaming development company NCSoft. In the short term, CEO Score forecasts a tough road ahead for the establishment of new companies, citing the sluggish domestic economy.
The Park Geun-hye administration is trying to create favorable business conditions for new businesses, but I think it's more important for conglomerates to provide a solid ground for startups to establish themselves.
While smaller companies are trying to make inroads, the Korean economy continues to be dominated by long-running giants such as Samsung Electronics, Hyundai Motor, and Hyundai Heavy Industries, companies that have been operating for more than 4 decades. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
The head of NATO says Russian troops have moved closer to the border with Ukraine in the latest show of force in the territory.
With more, we turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, we've seen a lot of military activity in the region lately. What's the current assessment by NATO? Well, speaking in Brussels on Tuesday, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg accused Russia of violating the September peace deal by continuing to support the separatist movement. He cited evidence that Russian special forces were training as well as providing equipment to the rebels in eastern Ukraine. Moscow's foreign ministry has denied any military involvement. Earlier, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko declared army units would be sent to defend key eastern cities in the event of a possible rebel offensive. The Chinese government has warned former British Governor Chris Patten to stop encouraging pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong as they continue to fight for fully free elections.
As the last British governor in Hong Kong during colonial times, Chris Patten should know better, recognize the change in the times, and immediately stop inciting the illegal Occupy Central activities. We hope people from all walks of life in Hong Kong can rationally discuss, reach a consensus, and implement universal suffrage in accordance with the law.
Student activist leaders are hoping to take their protests to top officials in Beijing and are expected to announce their next move on Thursday. And finally, the American artist Beyoncé has been ranked the highest paid woman in the music industry for 2014. According to Forbes magazine on Tuesday, the 33-year-old had made up to $115 million, more than doubling her earnings from the previous year. Next on the list was pop icon Taylor Swift, who jumped one spot from last year to number 2 with earnings of $64 million. Madonna, who is 56, failed to make the top 10 this year after shooting to first place in 2013. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Sports with me, Stephen Che. First up, it's the KBO Korean Series. The Nexen Heroes and the Samsung Lions met for Game 2 in Daegu. The Heroes took Game 1 on Monday, or rather, Tuesday. Looking to make it 2 in a row, they had Henry Sosa on the mound. Samsung put in Yoon Sung-hwan. And we go to the first inning. The Lions pounce as Che Tae-in drives in Michael Navarro. And speaking of Navarro, he goes deep in the second inning for 2 more, making it 3-0 Samsung. Then next inning, the Lion King, Lee Seung-yup, also hits a 2-run homer, breaking the postseason home run record with 14 in his career. Meanwhile, to the fourth, Nexen finally gets on board with Park Byung-ho's solo shot. But in the end, the Lions' Yoon go 7 solid innings in the 7-1 win as Samsung evens up the series 1-1. And moving on to the KBL doubleheader. First, the SK Knights hosted the KT Sonic Boom in Seoul. Now, the Knights start strong in the first and keep the ball movement alive throughout the game. All but 2 Knights score as SK outduels KT at home 72-61. Meanwhile, the visiting KGC can't hold down Mobis late in the game as the home team rebounds for the win to improve to a league-best 9-2 record. And we go off to the V-League first with the ladies. The GS Caltech's Kicks went up against the Korea Expressway Zenith. And the Kicks and Zenith split the first 2 sets before the Kicks step it up. Sarah Pavan shows up on both ends as GS earned their first win of the season. And over in Asan, the Unicard Hanse and the OK Savings Bank Russian Cash battle to the deciding set. And there, the Hanse soar 15-12 for their season's first win as well. And over to Champions League action, the 4th group stage matches kicked off across Europe, leading to some exciting results. In Korea, eyes were on Bayer Leverkusen's sensational Son Heung-min, whose double gave Bayer the win over Zenit 2-1 and a grip over Group C. Meanwhile, Real Madrid defeated Liverpool 1-0 and Borussia Dortmund took down Galatasaray 4-1 to remain perfect in their groups and advance to the knockout stage. And that's all I have for now. Stay tuned for your weather up next. Have a great evening.
Hello and happy Wednesday. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with the weather updates. So it was a typical late autumn day here in Korea, and clouds are now slowly moving in over some regions. At the moment, a dry weather effect is affecting here in Seoul as well as parts of Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces. So make sure to stay hydrated if you're in those regions. As for tomorrow, expect another mild autumn day, but keep in mind that showers are in store along the eastern coast. It looks like about 5 to 10 millimeters will drop in those regions tomorrow and on Friday, but another round of showers awaits Jeju towards the end of the week. Here are the readings for tomorrow. Seoul and Gwangju reach 18, Daegu and Busan makes it to 20. On to other regions. Jeju makes it to 18, Mount Kumgang drops below 0 in the morning. That's all I have for you now. I'll be back with more after midnight.
Thanks for the update, Po-kyung. And that's Primetime News for this Wednesday. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Chery. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.